Prince Harry is reportedly trembling in disbelief. His royal titles have just been wiped away by his own father. In a move no one thought would actually happen, King Charles has officially signed off on a bombshell bill that strips Prince Harry and Meghan Markle of their remaining royal titles, ending Megxit not just in spirit, but in law. Behind palace walls, sources say the decision left even seasoned royal aides speechless. What pushed the king to finally act? Who inside the monarchy helped drive the final nail? And how did Harry react when he found out? Stay with us. This isn't just the end of an era. It's the start of something far more personal and far more explosive. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It was a cold, tense morning in Windsor, a day that will be remembered not for any grand ceremony, not for the ringing of royal bells or the unfurling of banners, but for a quiet stroke of a pen behind palace walls. One signature, delivered without pomp or applause, brought finality to a royal chapter that has gripped the world for years. Prince Harry, once known as the cherished rebel of the House of Windsor, now found himself at the center of a maelstrom he never imagined, stripped, isolated, and stunned by the very institution that raised him. At precisely 9:47 a.m., sources confirm, King Charles III signed off on a piece of legislation now being called the Title Stripping Bill, a measure that will remove all remaining honorary royal designations from Prince Harry and his wife, Meghan Markle. Though the couple had already stepped back from royal duties years prior in a move dubbed Megxit, the legal and symbolic break was never finalized until now. The pen lifted, the ink dried, and with it, a royal bloodline was publicly severed. What followed inside those palace walls is said to have been nothing short of seismic. Prince William stood silently nearby, his expression unreadable. Princess, and stoic as ever, offered a single nod of approval. Camilla, queen consort, reportedly avoided eye contact with everyone in the room. There were no celebrations, no whispered congratulations. Only the slow, dawning awareness that a point of no return had just been crossed. For Prince Harry, thousands of miles away in California, the message hit like a thunderclap. Insiders describe him as trembling, devastated, utterly blindsided. Meghan, known for her controlled public demeanor, allegedly broke into an emotional storm behind closed doors. And the palace? The palace issued a one-line statement, almost surgical in tone. His Majesty the King has enacted royal title realignment measures in accordance with the sovereign's privilege and the preservation of monarchical tradition. No names were mentioned, but the message was loud and clear. This is not merely the story of a family disagreement. This is the story of a kingdom, a crown, and a legacy teetering between tradition and modernity, between forgiveness and finality. For years, the world has watched the Sussexes rewrite royal protocol, break rank with tradition, and transform their private grievances into public spectacle. They've built brands, Netflix deals, podcasts, memoirs, all while still clinging to titles handed to them by the very establishment they've condemned. And now, it's over. Officially. Irrevocably. The implications are immense. For the monarchy, this move represents a definitive statement. Loyalty, not lineage, is the currency of the crown. For Prince Harry, it signals a personal and institutional rejection, one that echoes far beyond family squabbles. And for Meghan, it could mark the beginning of a new, more aggressive chapter, one where legal recourse and media warfare replace diplomacy and distance. But to truly understand the gravity of what happened today, we must rewind the clock. Back to the early cracks in the royal foundation. Back to the moment Harry met Meghan, when fairy tale promises were made and battle lines were unknowingly drawn. Back to the interviews, the accusations, the stunning Oprah confessions. Because this moment, this brutal final stroke of a pen, didn't come out of nowhere. It was earned, step by step, headline by headline, silence by silence. This video will take you deep into the politics behind the palace gates. It will expose the backroom deals, the shifting alliances, and the unprecedented decisions that led to one of the most dramatic institutional purges in royal history. You'll learn what insiders are whispering in hushed tones, what documents have quietly circulated within Parliament, and what secret meetings tip the balance of power inside Buckingham Palace. You'll discover how King Charles, once torn between the image of a benevolent monarch and the weight of duty, finally made the call that Queen Elizabeth never could. How Prince William, long silent, positioned himself as the protector of monarchy legacy. How Princess and the steely traditionalist emerged as a quiet but firm voice pushing for clarity and consequence. And how Camilla, long painted by tabloids as the villain of yesteryear, may have played a larger role than anyone's willing to publicly admit. You'll hear the emotional fallout, the transatlantic fury, the royal aides in chaos, the paparazzi descending like vultures on Santa Barbara. And you'll get the truth about what Harry did next, how Meghan responded behind closed doors, and what message they sent to their inner circle just hours after the bill was signed. But most importantly, you'll witness the final unraveling of a royal identity of a prince who once walked behind his mother's coffin in front of a grieving nation, now walking away from the only institution that ever gave him purpose, protection, and pain in equal measure. So buckle in. Because this isn't just about Harry and Meghan. This is about monarchy versus modernity, about family versus firm, about betrayal, consequences, and the brutal cost of independence. Ask yourself, was this justice or vengeance? A necessary step or a ruthless one? And what does it mean for the monarchy's future that even blood can be erased with a single law? Long before the ink dried on the title-stripping bill, before the rift turned into a chasm, before words like abdication, betrayal, and exile were casually tossed around in the media, there was a moment when the world believed Prince Harry had finally found peace, a new life, a fairy tale within a fairy tale. That moment was May 19, 2018, the day Prince Harry married Meghan Markle in a ceremony broadcast to millions around the globe. From the outside, it was a wedding that promised renewal, diversity, and hope for a modern monarchy. The son of Princess Diana marrying a biracial, American, divorced actress. This wasn't just love, it was a symbolic shift, a sign that the royal family could evolve. But beneath the glitz, the ancient architecture, and the thunderous choir at St. George's Chapel, something more fragile was beginning to fracture. The seeds of separation were already in the soil, watered by unspoken resentment, cultural differences, and a palace system that had never fully adjusted to modern scrutiny. And at the center of it all was a young couple determined to change everything, without fully understanding what would be required to survive the change they sought. The media fascination was relentless. In the early months, headlines celebrated Meghan's fashion, her speeches, her common touch. But quickly, that praise soured into something more insidious. Anonymous palace sources began leaking stories of tension, of broken protocols, of disagreements with staff. Meghan, for all her charisma, was not fitting into the mold the firm had crafted over centuries. And Harry, fiercely protective of his wife, found himself increasingly alienated from both his brother and father. In October 2018, during a royal tour of Australia, the couple announced Meghan's pregnancy. The press was euphoric. For a fleeting moment, the Sussexes appeared untouchable. But just beneath that announcement was another internal crisis. Reports emerged of a screaming match between Meghan and palace aides over royal scheduling. Allegations of bullying began to circulate behind the scenes. The tabloids ran with stories of Meghan making Kate Middleton cry at a bridesmaid fitting, a story that would later be refuted by Meghan herself, who claimed the opposite had occurred. The months that followed saw a growing distance between Harry and William. Once inseparable, the brothers were now barely on speaking terms. Kensington Palace, which once housed both couples in harmony, was split into separate households. The narrative became clear. The royal Fab Four had dissolved. Then came the Africa tour in late 2019. It was here that Harry and Meghan dropped their first major bombshells on the public. In an ITV documentary, Meghan revealed that she was not okay, and Harry confirmed the rift with William, stating they were on different paths. These weren't mere gossip magazine whispers anymore. This was a televised cry for help. A prince admitting publicly that royal life was tearing him apart. By January 2020, the inevitable happened. Harry and Meghan issued a late-night statement on Instagram, declaring their intention to step back as senior royals, work to become financially independent, and split their time between the UK and North America. The statement was not pre-approved by Buckingham Palace. The fallout was immediate and explosive. Within hours, the media erupted in speculation. Senior royals were reportedly blindsided. A hastily organized summit at Sandringham, dubbed the Sandringham Summit, brought the Queen, Prince Charles, William, and Harry together for crisis talks. The outcome was historic. The Queen, in her official statement, expressed sadness but respect for their decision, while making it clear the Sussexes will no longer use their HRH titles and would no longer receive public funding. This was the true beginning of Megxit. Harry and Meghan relocated to Canada briefly before settling in Montecito, California. The decision stunned the royal family, but what followed was even more disruptive. In 2021, the couple sat down with Oprah Winfrey in an explosive tell-all interview that aired worldwide. It was the moment that shook the monarchy. In that conversation, Meghan revealed that someone in the royal family had expressed concerns about the skin color of their unborn child. Harry accused his family of being trapped within the system. Meghan discussed feeling suicidal and unsupported. The interview wasn't just personal, it was political. It framed the royal institution as outdated, indifferent, even dangerous. While the Sussexes won sympathy across liberal media and U.S. celebrities, the backlash in the U.K. was fierce. For many royal loyalists, it wasn't just an interview, it was treason. The Queen issued a famously diplomatic statement in response, saying recollections may vary, while vowing to address the claims privately. But the damage was done. In the months that followed, Harry released his memoir, Spare, a brutal, intimate account of his life within the royal cage. He detailed fights with William, tension with Charles, and emotional wounds left by Diana's death. He described his father's coldness, his stepmother Camilla's calculated media strategy, and his brother's growing estrangement. And through it all, the titles remained. Though Harry and Meghan no longer used their HRH designations, they retained the Duke and Duchess of Sussex titles. Their children, Archie and Lilibet, were later confirmed to hold the right to be styled as Prince and Princess, owing to rules set forth under King George V. That technicality allowed Harry and Meghan to continue associating with the royal brand, even while criticizing it. The royal family, for its part, maintained a strategic silence. They avoided confrontations, knowing that public feuds would only amplify the Sussexes' media reach. But behind the scenes, a different strategy was brewing, a legal strategy. Royal insiders whispered about discussions to re-examine the letter's patent governing royal titles. Parliament began quietly circulating drafts of what would eventually become the title-stripping bill. It was said that Queen Elizabeth had been hesitant to make a definitive move while alive, forever the peacemaker, ever mindful of optics. But after her passing in September 2022, the landscape shifted. Charles, newly crowned and determined to secure the institution's legacy, began to act. With William by his side and in lending constitutional weight, the new monarch began laying the groundwork to finish what the Queen never could. For over a year, the bill took shape quietly, cautiously. Legal advisors studied precedents, consulted constitutional experts, and navigated the labyrinth of laws governing hereditary honors. Finally, as 2025 dawned, the political conditions aligned. Support in the House of Commons was sufficient, public opinion had tilted toward royal preservation, and media fatigue toward Harry and Meghan had set in. And so, the bill was introduced, debated, passed, and today, it was signed. But to understand this final act of severance, one must revisit the long trail of moments that brought the monarchy here. From the fairy tale wedding that sparked global admiration to the televised interviews that upended royal mystique. From the declarations of independence to the memoirs of grievance, every step was a stone laid in the path toward this moment. Megxit was not a single decision. It was a slow, painful unraveling of trust, identity, and belonging. A story of how a prince tried to escape the institution that raised him, and how that institution, wounded and under siege, chose at last to let him go completely. Legislation and monarchy rarely collide in such direct and volatile fashion. In the United Kingdom, the royal family operates under a constitutional monarchy, one where laws are passed by Parliament, and the monarch, by tradition, gives royal assent. But this bill, the one now referred to in hushed tones as the title-stripping bill, was not an ordinary piece of legislation. It wasn't about budgets, roads, or health systems. It was about identity, status, power, and above all, lineage. The process of this bill's birth was anything but public. For more than a year, discussions moved beneath the surface, away from prying eyes. Meetings were conducted in old wood-paneled rooms in Westminster. Emails were sent without official headers, and legal minds pored over a question few had dared to explore in decades. Can a monarch legally remove hereditary titles from their own blood? At the heart of it was a legal contradiction. While the monarch had historically been the fountain of honor, bestowing and revoking titles at will, royal titles, particularly those involving the line of succession, were bound by historic documents, letters patent, and established precedents. It was not as simple as a king deciding on a whim to strike down his son's title. This was a land governed by tradition as much as by law. Still, Charles moved quietly but deliberately. He instructed a team of constitutional advisors to re-examine the letters patent of 1917, issued by King George V, which limited the use of royal titles to children and grandchildren of the sovereign in the male line. Under that declaration, Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet were entitled to their styles following Charles's ascension. But now, Charles was seeking a modification, a clarification that would allow the sovereign to override the historical framework in the face of extraordinary and unprecedented behavioral divergence. That phrasing, behavioral divergence, was no accident. It wasn't about politics or scandal in the tabloid sense. It was a formal justification wrapped in institutional language. It framed the issue not as a vendetta but as a constitutional necessity to protect the image and sanctity of the crown. The proposed bill, drafted under layers of legal language, was clear in its intent. It aimed to authorize the sovereign, with parliamentary oversight, to revoke any title, whether hereditary or conferred, when the titleholder had demonstrably and repeatedly acted in ways contrary to the dignity, unity, and sovereign interests of the United Kingdom and its territories. It didn't name Harry or Meghan directly. It didn't need to. The draft was first circulated among senior advisors, then introduced discreetly into committee discussions. It never made the front pages, not yet. Public attention was elsewhere, caught up in scandals, elections, and economic strife. But inside the palace, the air had shifted. This was not symbolic. It was a weapon. The bill's formal journey began in the House of Commons under the name, the Royal Titles Regulatory Reform and Alignment Act 2025. The name sounded technical, almost bureaucratic. But the clauses inside were anything but tame. One provision stood out, Section 4A. Empowered the reigning monarch, upon formal consultation with the Privy Council and a two-thirds advisory approval from Parliament, to revoke any title that endangers the enduring unity of the Crown and its representations. When it reached the Commons floor, debates were intense. Supporters framed it as a necessary tool to modernize the monarchy's internal accountability. Detractors called it a dangerous overreach that politicized what had always been a symbolic, ceremonial institution. One MP rose during debate and asked, "Are we truly stripping a man of his birthright because he dared to criticize the family that birthed him? Or are we doing it because that family finally ran out of patience?" The room was silent for a moment. But the momentum behind the bill had already been built. It had been weeks, months in the making. And crucially, there was no public resistance from the palace. On the contrary, aides were quietly briefing key journalists that the king believes it's time for institutional clarity. That phrase, institutional clarity, became the unofficial slogan of the legislation. What made this moment more potent than any other royal shakeup in recent history was that it had layers. This wasn't just about Harry and Meghan. It was about drawing a permanent line between royal service and commercial independence. It was about preventing a dangerous precedent that someone could weaponize royal prestige for personal gain while openly antagonizing the institution that gave them that platform. Supporters of the bill pointed to Harry's memoir, to the Netflix documentaries, the public interviews, and the lawsuits filed on both sides of the Atlantic. They argued that never before had a senior royal member used their status as both shield and sword to benefit commercially while undermining the very foundation of monarchy. The bill passed in the Commons after a fiercely debated second reading. The Lords, less politically charged and more loyal to tradition, offered minimal resistance. Behind the scenes, royal figures lobbied quietly but firmly for support. William made phone calls and reached out to allies. Even Camilla was said to have brokered discussions with undecided peers. When the bill passed its final reading, it moved to the palace for royal assent. But unlike previous pieces of legislation, this one came with an emotional weight rarely associated with such formalities. The king, according to one palace source, reviewed the documents for hours. He wasn't just signing a bill, he was making history. This moment was especially agonizing for Charles. To some, it felt like poetic justice. The same father who once demanded obedience from his own children was now forced to make a decision that would emotionally sever him from one of them. But others saw it differently. They believed Charles had grown hardened over the years, that the pressure to modernize, to preserve the monarchy for future generations, had made him colder, more pragmatic. He had no choice. One senior aide was quoted saying, "This wasn't about Harry anymore. This was about the survival of the monarchy itself. On the morning of the signing, security at the palace was increased. Aides were asked to vacate the signing chamber. Only a small group of senior royals and legal advisors were present. Charles wore a simple navy suit. There was no fanfare. He signed his name, paused for a moment, and then stood up without saying a word. Within 20 minutes, the royal household released a statement. Simple, sterile, deliberate, and the reaction was immediate. While many in the UK applauded the move as overdue, others felt it was unnecessarily cruel. Social media exploded with hashtags on both sides. Hashtag Justice for Harry and hashtag Protect the Crown trended simultaneously. In the United States, the reaction was different. Celebrities voiced their support for Harry and Meghan. Talk show hosts fumed at the monarchy. American news anchors framed the decision as another archaic tantrum from a dying institution. Yet the palace remained silent. No press conference. No apology. No further explanation. The bill, now law, stripped the Duke and Duchess of Sussex of their remaining royal titles and clarified that their children would no longer be styled as prince and princess. They were still members of the family by blood, but not by institution. The House of Windsor had drawn its red line. And for Prince Harry, that line was more than symbolic. It was personal. After years of trying to balance freedom and identity, he had lost the latter to secure the former. In the chapters to come, we'll examine the personal fallout. We'll step into the emotional core of this story, what Harry said when he received the news, what Meghan reportedly planned as her next move, and how the palace is preparing for inevitable retaliation. But here, in this moment, the story is about power, and about what happens when power, at long last, decides it has been too patient for too long. Behind the polished walls of Buckingham Palace and the somber tone of the official announcement lies a truth that few within the royal circle are ever willing to admit. King Charles did not arrive at this decision lightly. While the world saw a decisive monarch putting pen to paper, what they didn't see was the agonizing internal debate that stretched over months, the late-night pacing in his private study, the whispered conversations with confidants, and the deep, piercing guilt that haunted him in the days leading up to the bill's ratification. This wasn't just political. It wasn't just constitutional. For Charles, it was paternal. He had once cradled Harry in his arms. He had walked beside him after Diana's coffin. He had watched him transform from a mischievous teenager into a soldier, a humanitarian, and a husband. No matter the distance that had grown between them, Harry was his son. And no father signs a document that cuts away a piece of his child's legacy without some measure of torment. Those close to Charles describe him during this period as distant, distracted, and withdrawn. While he fulfilled his public duties with his usual measured decorum, behind closed doors he was often unreachable. Meetings were shorter, conversations more curt. His personal staff reported being dismissed early, more frequently than usual. It was as if he needed space not just from people, but from the weight of the crown itself. For a man raised in the shadow of Queen Elizabeth II, who rarely let emotion interfere with monarchy, this struggle marked a significant departure from tradition. Charles, though often painted as stoic and pragmatic, has long been an internalizer. He carries his conflict in silence. But silence does not mean indifference. And as this bill loomed closer to his desk, the silence turned heavier. Part of Charles's hesitancy stemmed from a personal promise. Multiple sources claim that, during Queen Elizabeth's final days, she expressed a wish to keep the family unified, even in the face of public controversy. She allegedly hoped reconciliation would come in time. Charles, still her son then and not yet king, had agreed in principle. There are those within the family who believe that promise weighed on him like a stone. To sign this bill, even under mounting pressure, felt like a betrayal of her last great wish. But another part of his struggle was more complex. Charles was not just a father, he was now a monarch. And as a monarch, he had to think not with his heart but with history. He had to protect an institution that had withstood wars, abdications, divorces, and scandals. An institution now threatened not by armies, but by headlines and streaming contracts. He could not allow sentiment to make the monarchy appear weak or indecisive. The monarchy's power lies in its mystique, its permanence. Letting Harry and Meghan continue to use royal titles while criticizing the institution was a risk Charles could no longer justify. Still, even with all the legal clarity and constitutional support, the emotional fog was thick. One aide confided that in the week leading up to the signature, Charles had repeatedly asked to see photos of Harry's childhood. Old albums, private collections, They described him as sitting quietly, gazing at pictures of Diana holding Harry, of the two boys at Balmoral, of their family ski trips. It was as though he needed to remind himself of what had been lost and of what might never be recovered. Throughout that week, he called on a handful of trusted voices. One was Princess Anne. She reportedly visited him in his private sitting room and delivered her thoughts with characteristic bluntness. "The monarchy must be preserved," she said, according to someone familiar with the conversation. "You've given him enough chances. This is about duty now." William, too, played a critical role. Though he refrained from pressuring his father directly, his quiet resolve made his position clear. The two met for an hour behind closed doors 3 days before the signing. The meeting was described as tense but respectful. William emphasized the damage Harry's media appearances were doing to the crown's credibility, particularly among the younger generation. He allegedly said, "We're either a monarchy or we're a brand, father. We can't be both." Camilla, by contrast, was more reserved. Her loyalty to Charles has never been in question, but insiders note that she approached the issue delicately. Having once endured years of public hatred herself, she understood the weight of royal exile. She warned Charles to expect an emotional and strategic counterattack from the Sussexes. "They won't go quietly," she is said to have noted, "and they'll make it personal." Another pivotal figure was Lord Chamberlain Andrew Parker, a senior advisor and former head of MI5. He laid out the security and symbolic risks of maintaining the status quo. In his view, allowing Harry and Meghan to continue using titles while operating as international celebrities undermined the integrity of the monarchy's global image. He cited growing public confusion about the Sussexes' standing and suggested that clarity, though painful, was essential. But even as Charles nodded through these briefings and read the memorandums, a quiet storm brewed within him. He reportedly took long walks alone through the gardens at Highgrove. Staff say they saw him, at times, simply staring into the distance. One gardener recalled seeing him near the wildflower meadow, head bowed, unmoving for almost 10 minutes. The night before the signing, Charles reportedly remained in his private quarters until well past 2 a.m. He read a handwritten letter left to him years earlier by Queen Elizabeth, sealed and marked, to be opened only when needed most. No one knows what the letter said. But the next morning, Charles woke early, dressed deliberately, and told his team, it must be done. He walked into his private office alone. No grand chamber, no military guard, just a simple desk, the official document, and a pen. His hand hesitated before touching the paper. Those who witnessed it said the pause was long, nearly 30 seconds. Then, slowly he signed. One stroke, then another, then another. When he finished, he sat back and let out a sigh. Quiet, deep, and final. The signature didn't just end a legal process. It ended an emotional one. And while the world was quick to assign blame, quick to take sides, few paused to imagine the burden of that moment for Charles. He had effectively disinherited his son, not from his blood, but from the institution that defined their shared legacy. He had chosen the crown over kin, duty over feeling. He left the room without ceremony. His aides collected the document and began the process of distribution. The palace's press office, already prepared, released the official statement at exactly 11 a.m. The media blitz began within minutes. News anchors analyzed every word. Royal experts dissected its historical importance. Social media lit up with fury and praise in equal measure. But Charles didn't return to his public office that afternoon. He remained in his private wing, alone for the rest of the day. Staff brought him tea and water, but he did not request any meetings. The king, usually so punctual and regimented, let the afternoon slide by without routine. Because in that moment, there was nothing routine about what had been done. This wasn't a king exercising ceremonial duties. This was a father burying what remained of a broken bond. The repercussions would soon unfold. Harry's response would make headlines. Meghan's silence or defiance would be dissected. The press would tear into the timeline, the motivations, the hidden agendas. But for now, within the quiet corridors of the monarchy, something fundamental had changed. Charles had signed the document. But what he lost in that moment, only he will ever truly understand. While the ink was still drying in London, 5,000 miles away in Montecito, California, another storm was quietly brewing. Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex no longer in the eyes of British law, was in her sun-soaked estate when the news broke. And if Buckingham Palace had hoped for silence or surrender, they were sorely mistaken. What followed, behind closed doors and shielded from the public eye, was an eruption of disbelief, fury, and strategic recalibration. Because for Meghan, this was not just a legal maneuver. It was a declaration of war. The estate in Montecito had long become their sanctuary, a fortress of serenity away from palace protocols and public scrutiny. Nestled behind secured gates and rolling hills, the sprawling home was surrounded by privacy hedges, private security, and towering oaks. But within its luxurious walls, the atmosphere shifted dramatically the moment the palace issued its cold, clinical statement. Meghan, according to one of her former staff members now living under non-disclosure, was pacing, livid, and visibly shaken. The statement reportedly reached her phone moments before it hit global headlines. She read it in silence. Once. Then again. And then, reportedly, she threw the phone across the room. Not because she hadn't seen it coming, but because the finality of it struck her harder than any leak or whisper had ever prepared her for. She had always believed that the institution wouldn't dare go this far, that her public platform, her alliances in media, and her role as the mother of royal children gave her a shield, even if informal. That, even in exile, she held enough leverage to remain untouchable. But that illusion shattered in seconds. Immediately, a flurry of activity was set in motion inside the house. Aides were summoned. Lawyers were called. PR advisors were pulled into emergency Zoom meetings. Her crisis communication strategist, once part of Hollywood's finest elite, was tasked with assessing damage control. And yet, there was one clear instruction from Meghan that echoed through the house. We don't retreat. She refused to release a public statement. Not at first. Instead, she opted for silence, not out of weakness, but calculation. Meghan has always understood the value of timing. In her world, silence isn't surrender, it's suspense. A pause before the punch. Privately, she was anything but composed. Sources describe her as defiant, fired up, and ready to fight. She reportedly told a confidant, "If they thought this would break us, they don't understand who they're dealing with." That sentiment quickly morphed into a strategy. Because for Meghan, this wasn't about a title. It was about legacy, about narrative, about control. By noon, a contingency team had been assembled. Several of Meghan's closest allies, former colleagues from her Suits days, political strategists, and female entrepreneurs from her Archetypes podcast network, were pulled into consultation. The topic, what comes next? Internally, 3 options were reportedly floated. The first, a hard-hitting media interview, designed to reclaim the narrative and paint the palace's move as an act of institutional cruelty against a modern woman of color. Media outlets in the U.S. were already expressing dismay at the title revocation. Meghan's camp saw an opening, an opportunity to relaunch her image not as a royal, but as a silenced woman taking on a centuries-old system of power. The second, a legal review of the bill itself. Though the British Parliament had passed the legislation within their rights, Meghan's lawyers explored whether elements of the move could be challenged under international human rights frameworks, particularly concerning the rights of her children, Archie and Lilibet. Though unlikely to succeed legally, the team discussed using it as leverage to stoke public sympathy. The third, more quietly discussed option, leveraging the moment to pivot Meghan's public image entirely away from royalty. Sources claim she was already exploring launching her own production company, female-led media platform, or wellness brand. The idea would be to leave the Duchess' identity behind and emerge as something even more powerful, Meghan Markle, global thought leader and cultural icon, free of royal constraints and finally in full command of her voice. But the defiance wasn't just strategic. It was deeply personal. Meghan had always carried a sense of grievance toward the royal family. Not only for how she believed she was treated, but for what she viewed as their systemic failure to protect her and her children. In private conversations, she often referred to the firm as cold, calculated, and covertly hostile. The title stripping, in her eyes, confirmed every suspicion. To her, it wasn't an act of governance. It was a message: stay gone, stay quiet, stay erased. But Meghan had no intention of being erased. The weeks leading up to the title revocation had seen Meghan increasingly re-engaging with public life. She had made appearances at women's leadership events, hosted podcast discussions about visibility and power, and met quietly with political figures on issues ranging from reproductive rights to education access. The palace's action, if anything, provided her a megaphone, and it wasn't long before signals of defiance began to surface. On social media, Archewell quietly updated its language, removing royal references but doubling down on the family's commitment to compassion and change. Within 24 hours of the palace's statement, the Archewell Foundation published a feature on its front page titled, "Power is never given, it's built." The article, while seemingly generic, featured a quote Meghan had previously used: "Don't wait for permission to exist. You already do." Subtle, but unmistakable. Meghan also scheduled a meeting with a well-known biographer, known for crafting redemption arcs for celebrities embroiled in public battles. Sources speculate that a second memoir, one focused solely on her royal years in the aftermath, may already be in early planning stages. Meanwhile, those within Meghan's circle pushed back on rumors that the couple was blindsided by the bill. One insider claimed, "We knew this was coming. But there's a difference between knowing and witnessing the cruelty of how it was done." There was no call, no personal message, just erasure and print. Friends of Meghan reportedly began contacting U.S. news outlets to gauge interest in exclusive interviews or documentary treatments exploring the personal cost of speaking truth to power. While Harry remained emotionally wounded, Meghan was gathering her army. To many within California's elite circles, Meghan's transformation was already underway. No longer was she the outsider fighting for inclusion into the House of Windsor. She was now rebranding herself as the woman who escaped it and lived to tell the story. A survivor, a voice, a symbol. But behind all the curated strategy, there was pain. Insiders confirmed that Meghan spent hours alone in her home office after the news broke. She reportedly cried, not out of regret, but from what one friend described as the sadness of recognition. The recognition that whatever had remained of her connection to the monarchy, to that fleeting moment when she thought she could be both royal and real, it was now dust. And yet, even in her most private moments of vulnerability, Meghan refused to be seen as defeated. She reminded those around her that she had endured worse, that she had walked through fire before, that this, while painful, was only a chapter. And so, Montecito didn't go quiet. It went to war, softly, strategically, defiantly. What comes next for Meghan is not yet clear. Whether she will strike back publicly or continue her quiet repositioning into a new role outside the royal frame remains to be seen. But one thing is certain, she will not fade. And the palace knows it. As we turn to the next chapter, the lens shifts. Because while Meghan may be preparing for a strategic comeback, Prince Harry is unraveling in ways that no publicist can manage. His reaction was not loud, not strategic, and not defiant. It was something else entirely. The news came to him not with ceremony or warning, but through the shrill ping of a smartphone notification. Prince Harry was standing alone in the garden of his Montecito estate, coffee in hand, sun brushing the tops of the trees, when a single headline flashed across his screen. It was from a British publication he'd long tried to avoid, but that morning, instinct led him to glance. And there it was in cold, unambiguous language: King Charles signs title stripping bill. Harry and Meghan officially lose royal status. At first, there was no movement, no gasp, no shattering of glass, just a tightening of the jaw, a furrow of the brow. And then, almost imperceptibly, his body slumped forward. His shoulders dropped. The coffee trembled in his hand before spilling into the grass. He stared at the screen like it had betrayed him. He had known the bill was being debated. His aides had warned him it might pass. But in some recess of his heart, there remained a hope, quiet, desperate, that his father would never actually sign it. That the man who had once read bedtime stories to him, who held him during Diana's funeral, who knew the trauma that still lived inside him, wouldn't. But the hope had been misplaced. The ink was dry, the damage irreversible. According to insiders, the moment shattered him. Back inside the house, Meghan found him sitting silently in the living room, phone in one hand, the other covering his face. He wasn't speaking, not angry, not confused, just lost. It was as though someone had unplugged him from reality. The look in his eyes wasn't shock, it was surrender, a quiet, devastating realization that something had died. He reportedly muttered the words, "I can't believe he did it." Again and again, "I can't believe it." Meghan tried to comfort him, but Harry wasn't listening. His breathing grew shallow. His voice, when it emerged, was hoarse. "I thought we had time. I thought we could still fix it someday." That was the truth buried beneath all the headlines and accusations. For all his anger, for all the public interviews and harsh truths told on American television, Harry had never fully shut the door. He had left a crack open. A pathway back, if not to duty, then at least to dignity. Now, that door had been slammed shut, and he was on the wrong side of it, alone. In the hours that followed, Harry disappeared from sight. Not physically, but emotionally. Friends who tried to reach him by phone were told he was not in the right frame of mind. A longtime bodyguard reportedly said he saw Harry sitting on the floor of his private study, hands over his ears, eyes shut tight, for over an hour. This wasn't the reaction of a public figure. It was the reaction of a son who felt abandoned. Again, for Harry, the wounds of his childhood have never fully healed. The trauma of Diana's death, the years of media harassment, the cold routines of palace life, he carried them like invisible armor. But this new rupture cracked that armor open. Because the betrayal wasn't from strangers or tabloids. It came from family. From blood. He reportedly sent a single message to a friend in London. He's made his choice. According to a member of his inner circle, Harry spent most of that evening in the garden, walking alone under the trees. He didn't speak to Meghan. He didn't eat. He didn't even respond to his security staff. He just walked, sometimes talking to himself, sometimes to no one. By nightfall, the pain turned inward. His hands were shaking. He was seen sitting on the edge of his bed, eyes red, staring into space. It wasn't a breakdown in the public sense, no shouting, no throwing of objects, but an implosion. A collapse of certainty. Because for Harry, the loss wasn't just about a title. It was about identity. He had always believed he could be both things, royal and renegade. He thought he could create a hybrid space where duty and freedom could coexist. But the institution had answered back with brutal clarity. You cannot be both. You must choose. And he had chosen, years ago. Now the consequences had arrived. In the days that followed, Harry retreated almost completely. His communication with the outside world narrowed to a select few. Advisors encouraged him to issue a statement, but he refused. He was not ready to speak. His team released a quiet message through Archwell expressing continued commitment to philanthropy, but there was no personal comment. No direct rebuttal. Privately, he took time to process. To grieve. Sources close to him said he looked thinner. That his voice carried less energy. That he no longer lingered in rooms, but moved through them quickly, as if trying to escape something. He reportedly told one friend, "It feels like morning, but they're still alive." Therapists and close friends urged him to refocus on his work, his family, his children. And while he did spend time with Archie and Lilibet in the days that followed, those moments were often marred by a visible detachment. His daughter reportedly asked, "Why is Daddy sad?" And Harry, struggling to answer, just held her tighter. What made the emotional collapse even more acute was the timing. Harry had, in recent months, been exploring ways to bridge the gap. He had made private gestures toward reconciliation. There were plans to travel to the UK quietly later in the year. He had spoken to a mutual royal intermediary, rumored to be Princess Eugenie, about initiating a low-profile family retreat. None of that mattered now. The door was closed. Some within his team suggested Harry had underestimated his father's resolve. That, in spite of everything, he still saw Charles as a man trying to juggle duty and love. He had misread the moment, misjudged the finality. But others believe Harry always knew this day would come, and that the pain wasn't from surprise, but from confirmation. A confirmation that he would never be welcomed back, that he would always be the outsider. Not just physically, but legally, publicly, historically. And yet, amidst all the grief, a strange resolve began to form. Harry, while broken, was not defeated. In the days following the collapse, he began speaking to a select few about next steps, not in anger, but in necessity. He reportedly told one friend, "This changes everything. So now we start again." What again means remains unclear. But the inner circle believes this may mark a turning point. Not a return, but a rebirth. A redefinition of identity no longer tied to the crown. No longer waiting for an apology. No longer holding on to the past. For years, Harry had existed in limbo, neither royal nor civilian, stuck in the gray zone between obligation and freedom. But now, the institution had made the decision for him. And in that, there was pain, but also clarity. He may no longer be His Royal Highness, but he was still Harry. And for the first time in a long time, he would have to decide what that truly meant, without palace approval. without inherited identity, without a title to shield or define him. The man who once walked behind his mother's casket in front of a nation now stood alone, no longer prince, no longer pawn, just a man. And for better or worse, this was the beginning of whatever came next. While the world's attention focused squarely on King Charles and the dramatic signing of the title-stripping bill, what few realized was that this unprecedented decision had not been made in isolation. Behind the polished facade of monarchy, two senior royals had been quietly steering the conversation for months, Prince William and Princess Anne. It was not a loud alliance. It did not require secret meetings under candlelight or coded messages passed between courtiers. But it was an alliance nonetheless, one rooted in shared values, quiet strategy, and a growing conviction that something decisive had to be done before the crown itself was compromised beyond repair. Both William and Anne had long been considered the most dutiful members of the family. While Charles had always carried the burden of future kingship with a mix of melancholy and hesitance, and William had embodied the idea of selfless service. Neither chased attention. Neither gave tabloid interviews. Both were known for their relentless work ethic, no-nonsense attitudes, and disdain for self-pity. And both watched the unraveling of Harry and Meghan's relationship with the institution not as a family drama, but as a constitutional threat. It began, as most quiet revolutions do, in a series of side conversations. Royal aides started to notice that Anne and William often ended meetings in quiet discussion, lingering after formal agendas had concluded. At royal events, they stood close, speaking in hushed tones. At family gatherings, they were rarely seen apart for long. What they were doing, according to one insider, was building consensus through silence. And, with her years of experience and fierce loyalty to the monarchy, brought to the table a historical lens. She remembered the scandal of her uncle Edward VIII, the abdication crisis, the media frenzies that nearly toppled the public's faith in the crown. She had lived through the aftermath of Charles and Diana's explosive divorce, and later the death of Diana itself, when public anger had nearly boiled over. To Anne, the Sussex saga was more than a personal betrayal. It was a slow-burning constitutional fire. William, meanwhile, had different motivations. For him, this was about legacy, his own and that of his children. He understood the fragile ecosystem that sustained the monarchy. He had studied his grandmother's reign closely, observed how consistency and silence had been the currency of survival. Watching his brother transform royal life into a soap opera made him seethe not only with personal pain, but with a deeper fear that the institution he would one day inherit was being hollowed from within. Their alliance gained shape in early 2024, shortly after the publication of Prince Harry's memoir. While Charles remained outwardly composed and inwardly conflicted, William was livid. Privately, he described the book as an act of sabotage. He was particularly incensed by the depiction of their childhood, the suggestion that he had been cold, complicit, even cruel. In his view, Harry had crossed a line from family truth-telling to outright betrayal. That was when the first serious conversation between William and Anne reportedly took place, over tea in one of the quieter drawing rooms at Sandringham. According to a palace staffer who overheard part of their conversation, William asked a single question: at what point does loyalty to family become disloyalty to the crown? And, without hesitation, responded, when the family member stops being a servant of the crown. That moment, though quiet, marked the beginning of a coordinated push, and began reaching out to members of the Privy Council. William began meeting discreetly with legal advisors connected to the palace. Their shared goal was not revenge. It was containment. They needed a mechanism to clearly and legally sever Harry and Meghan's public association with royalty before the damage became irreparable. Together, they built the momentum for what would become the title-stripping bill, and used her decades of influence within royal circles and government corridors to apply pressure. She didn't shout. She didn't threaten. But her presence in meetings changed the tone. When Anne spoke, people listened. She reminded ministers of the monarchy's fragility in an age of growing Republican sentiment. She spoke not as a sister-in-law to Harry, but as a guardian of a centuries-old legacy. William, meanwhile, worked the optics. He ensured that every public appearance reflected unity, tradition, and restraint. Behind the scenes, he had one-on-one meetings with trusted MPs, discussing the future of the crown in the digital age. He reminded them that a monarchy cannot coexist with commercial celebrity culture, that blurred lines confuse the public and undermine credibility. What made their alliance so effective was that it was never overt. They did not need to stand at podiums. They did not need to leak memos. Their influence was executed through posture, silence, and the subtle steering of conversation. Even Queen Camilla, who had her own reservations about Harry and Meghan, reportedly respected their approach. While she occasionally offered her perspective, she recognized that and William were driving the engine of reform and wisely chose to support their efforts from a distance rather than interfere. As the bill moved through Parliament, both and William took a step back, allowing the process to unfold naturally. But they watched closely and ensured that the language of the bill would hold under constitutional scrutiny. William remained in touch with public relations teams to prepare for the backlash. One revealing moment came just 2 days before the bill passed. A private dinner was held at Clarence House, attended by Charles, Camilla, William, and Anne. It was said to be a tense but resolute gathering. Charles, tired and quiet, looked to his sister and son for reassurance. According to one staffer, and leaned forward and said, "This isn't a punishment, Charles. It's a correction." William echoed her sentiment, telling his father, "This isn't about abandoning Harry. It's about protecting everything we've been raised to serve." Charles nodded, slowly, grimly, and said, "Then let it be done." Their alliance was complete. Their objective secured. The titles would be stripped. The message would be clear. The crown does not beg to be respected. It expects to be. When the news broke, neither Anne nor William released statements. They continued with their engagements, smiled for the cameras, shook hands, and carried on. That was their style, always has been. Action, not commentary. Precision, not spectacle. But for those who understood the inner workings of the monarchy, it was clear who had guided the hand that signed the bill. And it wasn't just the king. As we turn the page, we shift from alliance to image. The next chapter explores how the royal family shaped the public narrative, carefully, deliberately, so that even in controversy, the monarchy stood untarnished. In the age of social media warfare and 24-hour news cycles, it is no longer enough for royalty to remain silent and hope tradition will speak on their behalf. The old adage that the crown never explains, never complains, has evolved, not discarded, but retooled. Today's monarchy understands that image is not simply a matter of elegance or posture, but a battlefield. And in the weeks leading up to and immediately after the enactment of the title-stripping bill, Buckingham Palace executed a media strategy so calculated, so meticulously controlled, that even seasoned PR experts acknowledged its efficiency. From the moment it became clear that the bill would pass, the palace's communication arm shifted into gear. There were no overt declarations, no speeches, no dramatic warnings. Instead, a quiet campaign of influence was unleashed behind the scenes, one that played out in carefully selected interviews, sympathetic press briefings, subtle rebranding, and most crucially, a masterful control of timing. Timing was everything. The palace ensured that the announcement of the bill's ratification would drop during a window in which no other major political events dominated UK news. It was a Monday morning, deliberate and strategic. Monday mornings guarantee maximum reach. The public is engaged, media desks are fully staffed, and online readership peaks. Within 5 minutes of the palace statement, every major UK outlet carried the story, each with nearly identical headlines, signaling an orchestrated rollout. But what stood out was the language. The palace statement was only 27 words long. It didn't name Prince Harry. It didn't mention Meghan Markle. There were no adjectives, no sentiment, just a formal declaration that royal title realignment measures had been enacted in accordance with the sovereign's privilege and the preservation of monarchical tradition. The message was unmistakable. This is not personal, it's structural. Not punishment, but policy. It was a tactical masterstroke. By refusing to personalize the message, the palace denied Harry and Meghan the moral high ground of victimhood. They left no soft target, no outrage bait, no soundbite to rally around. It became almost impossible for media sympathetic to Harry and Meghan to frame the decision as emotional or retaliatory. Behind the scenes, royal aides worked overtime. A few hours before the public statement was released, trusted journalists from the BBC, The Times, The Telegraph, and select columnists from the Daily Mail were given early briefings under embargo. The briefings included subtle framing cues that this was about clarity, consistency, and the dignity of the crown. Reporters were told that the king had acted only after exhausting all options for reconciliation, and that this step was painful but necessary. No direct quotes were issued, but the tone was clear. Simultaneously, royal-friendly voices began quietly amplifying the message. Within an hour of the announcement, several respected royal commentators appeared on morning television. Their commentary was uncannily aligned. "It's not about estrangement," said one. "It's about streamlining the monarchy." Another noted, "This isn't exile. This is a sovereign executing his constitutional responsibility." The strategy was clear: remove emotion. Focus on duty. Redefine the narrative. Social media was next. Although the royal family does not engage directly on platforms like Twitter and Instagram, they monitor them relentlessly. Within minutes of the announcement, the official royal family Instagram account posted a photograph of King Charles shaking hands with young scouts at a community service event. The caption made no reference to the bill, but the timing wasn't coincidental. It reinforced the monarchy's message: we are focused on service, not scandal. Prince William and Princess Kate's social media accounts followed suit. They posted family-focused images, photos of the whale's children participating in environmental cleanups, attending school events, and smiling with diverse groups of young people. Again, no mention of Harry. No reference to titles. But the implication was unavoidable. This is the future. This is what royal looks like. Even Princess Anne, who rarely engages with media narratives, allowed a trusted journalist to accompany her to a public engagement that same afternoon. The photos that emerged showed her in full regalia, meeting with military veterans and holding court with school children. She gave no interview. She said nothing of the bill. But her presence, composed and unwavering, delivered a message more powerful than words. Meanwhile, inside the palace's digital media room, analysts tracked trends and sentiment. They monitored hashtags, flagged virality spikes, and tracked the geographic spread of reactions. One surprising revelation emerged early. In the UK, public opinion was overwhelmingly supportive. Over 70% of online commentary within Britain favored the move. The prevailing sentiment? Enough is enough. In the US, the picture was more complicated. American media leaned sympathetic toward Harry and Meghan. Outlets like CNN and MSNBC ran segments questioning the motives behind the title stripping, framing it as an outdated monarchy lashing out at modern voices. But even then, the palace had anticipated it. In preparation, royal aides had quietly encouraged several British political figures, not senior ministers, but respected peers, to comment on the record. These figures spoke in measured tones about the constitutional implications of the decision, avoiding any appearance of personal vendetta. Their interviews gave international press an alternative framing, that this was about governance, not grievance. Perhaps the most effective element of the palace's strategy was what it didn't do. It did not leak personal texts. It did not respond to tabloid accusations. It did not engage with celebrity commentary. It allowed silence to be its shield. In doing so, it denied the Sussexes an opponent to push against. Even Harry's most loyal supporters privately admitted frustration. There was no quote to attack, no press conference to ridicule, no emotional statement to dissect. Just silence, and a monarchy that looked, at least externally, unfazed. It was, as one analyst put it, a PR judo move. Let the Sussexes strike out emotionally. Let American media rant. Let Twitter trend. And through it all, remain stoic. Remain above. What this strategy ultimately achieved was something no press release could accomplish. It framed the narrative in terms of control. The royal family wasn't being dragged into a fight. They were choosing not to participate. The image of a calm, forward-facing monarchy only made the Sussexes appear more erratic in contrast. And yet, the strategy did not mean the palace was insensitive to backlash. Contingency plans were drawn. Should Harry release a reactive interview, or should Meghan publish a blistering op-ed? The palace had already drafted responses, short, non-combative statements reiterating the original rationale: dignity, unity, and forward movement. Interestingly, insiders say King Charles personally reviewed all drafts of those contingency messages and reportedly struck through any line he felt was too sharp or too emotional. His instruction was clear: no drama, no escalation. Let the institution speak through example, not argument. In the weeks that followed the title revocation, the royal family doubled down on public service. King Charles launched a new educational initiative. Princess Catherine spearheaded a mental health campaign for youth. Prince William opened a climate summit in Berlin. All official appearances were well documented, well lit, and widely shared. The goal was unspoken but obvious. While others engage in controversy, we engage in country. The palace's media strategy wasn't just about avoiding fallout. It was about reinforcing the brand of monarchy as resilient, non-reactive, and quietly dignified. Whether one agrees with the decision to strip Harry and Meghan of their titles or not, the machinery that executed that moment was one of the most sophisticated royal communications operations in recent memory, and its success lay in its restraint. As the public digested the silence, as pundits filled in the blanks, as headlines grew stale, one fact remained: the royal family did not flinch. And in doing so, they preserved their greatest weapon, not scandal, not spectacle, but the illusion of permanence. In the next chapter, we go even deeper into the hidden rivalries, whispered loyalties, and raw power shifts that made this moment possible. Because behind every royal act lies a battlefield no one is meant to see. The image presented to the public is one of calm tradition, immovable protocol,